Welcome to Sherlock Mondays, the Hound of the Baskervilles. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This is the final episode, number 8 of this special Hound series. Tonight, we'll talk about the legacy of the Hound of the Baskervilles. I also have an announcement tonight about a couple special Sherlock Mondays episodes coming your way. And joining me as co-host, pulled him right out of the chat onto a show to co-host, is Max Magee. Max, I am so happy to have you join us.
I am glad to be here. Thank you.
You have been a vital presence in the chat. Thank you so much. I love that. So,
good. Madeline, I'll be checking your work at the end.
And and it's one of the things I've always loved about all the Biblioventure series that we've done is the way the chat kind of takes off into its own kind of show on its own for those who do it live. So I love that. And you were perfect. You were made for the chat on our show.
Right.
And you actually came to these things through the Pickwick Papers show too, right?
Yes, I did. Actually, you and I would say this sort of tongue in cheek, you and I met through Charles Dickens. And I was actually doing a self-guided project read along with some of the early Dickens works, and I just happened to stumble across your Pickwick Papers announcement about a month before it started as I was reading Pickwick, and I went, well, I can wait. And so I've been reading the serials along with you, and I love those. I've really been enjoying doing, research on pomade and who made the best pomade with what bear grease and
You were
getting the smell
sending
of the
me the
bear.
best emails about these rabbit holes. Man, I love that kind of interaction. So, and then we found that, oh, you also like Sherlock. Guess what?
Yeah.
I'm doing
Well,
Sherlock.
and then you and I met in person for the first time at BSI weekend this past January. So, it was a
Yep.
match made in Victorian literature heaven.
We were destined to do something together here. So I'm happy you're here. All right, everyone, let me fully introduce our co-host, Maximilian Magee, PSI, Agent Tobias Atelny, is the social chair of the notorious Canary Trainers of Madison, Wisconsin. He leads a group known as the Comrades of the Order and its spin-off Spode scion, the Captain Basil's Mignonettes.
Mm-hmm.
In
official Spode article.
In 2021, he attended his first BSI weekend and has never looked back. He's a hyper active member of the Hounds of the Internet, frequent visitor and member of the Norwegian Explorers of Minnesota. He's also the Gopher Yeoman Purser of the Tourists, that's TOR-ists, related to the Hound, International SS of Chicago. His background, education, and work experience in tech has led to all sorts of weird and interesting Sherlockian projects, like an re-serialization of the Hound of the Baskervilles, which I'm going to ask you about. And also using AI and computer science to analyze, dissect, and discuss the canon. Recent projects include brute force searching the entire canonical text for longest palindromes. And it's 12 characters long and occurs in Copper Beeches. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Should we tell people what it is or have them find? No, we should have them find it. There's a 12-character palindrome in Copper Beeches.
If they go to the panelist descriptions, I believe, on your website, there is a hint as to which story it occurs inside of.
All right.
But you always have to look for data.
Max, you have a BS in Engineering, Mechanics, and Astronautics from the University of Wisconsin. He worked as a flight design engineer and flight controller at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. Worked as CTO of a cloud AI startup. Is currently manager of software development at a local Madison software company, and is a third-degree black belt and teacher of, how do you say it? Kuksul-Wan?
Kuksul-Wan.
Kuksul-Wan, and former world champion in Bong, the martial art long staff, not the marijuana smoking pipe.
Nope. I am not a champion in that.
Wow. Thank you for bringing all of your expertise to this show. Isn't this great too? When about this when you meet other Sherlockians and they have all these other interests and things that they've done, and it always brings fresh new perspective to the thing you have in common, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let me tell you a weird six-way Karoom connection. I met Greg Ruby, BSI, who is one of the co-founders of the Fourth Garadeb, the Numismatic Science Society, um, through my interest in Apollo, not ephemera, but interesting Apollo astronaut anecdotes, let's say. So I actually stumbled across his website before I was even involved in any Sherlockiana, any Science Society, because he and his group of, again, so coin collectors, coin experts, they publish anything related to Sherlock Holmes. They've got a very detailed description of how it came about. And I have a 1976 dollar coin. It's an Eisenhower dollar that has the crater Sherlock that was named by Jack Schmidt, the geologist astronaut, one of the last moonwalkers, who was a professor at the University of Wisconsin when I was there. I think he's an emeritus professor. But anyhow, so my interest in space, my interest in coins, my interest in Sherlock Holmes, all roads led to one. And so I ended up, meeting Greg online. But when I saw him in person, I went, "Are you that Greg Ruby?"
And I didn't know that Sherlock's on the moon, huh? There's a
Yep.
great name for Sherlock. I didn't.
There are quite a few literary characters that, and also inside jokes that those last Apollo astronauts slipped in because they're the first ones to see it. That, they landed in a spot that had previously been unexplored and they got to name it. And I think there's a Dickens crater as well. There's I'm trying to remember if it's like Tom Sawyer or if it's Tom and Huck, but it's it's good stuff.
Wow. All
And
right.
Bob, I'm a lot spacey.
Well, you also brought a drink for tonight, the
Yeah.
Wisconsin Old Fat. Tell us about the Wisconsin Old Fat because I'm drinking it too. I made it the way
Excellent.
you gave.
So as promised, this is my The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes collectible rocks. Oh, I'm sorry. Collectible rocks glass with a little double reference. This is both a speckled band reference. I guess it's Samuel Clemens reference, Mark Twain, as well as a Star Trek reference. If anyone gets that one, it would be Madeline or Rudy. So this is made with brandy. And so that is not the traditional way that you make an old fashioned. An old fashioned, prior to Prohibition, was made with bourbon or whiskey. And that was about it. You might want to add a little bitters to it. You might add a little bit of like a fruit garnish, but that was it. And so with the Wisconsin tradition of brandy after Prohibition started because a brand called the Christian Brothers, which I happen to have here.
I know them well. I went to both. I went to LaSalle High School and college, taught by Christian Brothers for 8 years of my life.
Not sure it's the same Christian Brothers, but maybe. And they started the tradition of brandy in Wisconsin in particular because we ran out of good whiskey. So after Prohibition, everyone had destroyed all of the big whiskey casks and the whiskey manufacturers. And the Christian Brothers were like, well, we've got brandy. And so they said, well, we can make something out of that, but I don't like the taste of brandy. So what do? You put orange slices in it. You put cherries in it. You add sugar to it. You use soda. And so you end up with a very different drink, but it's delicious.
I did the crushed cherries and orange, and I did like you said, like I totally muddled them like and mashed them with the maple syrup, and I
Yeah,
used actually real cherries, which is like just because we had some in the house, and then I added my maraschinos because I love those anyway. So I have a giant
excellent.
jar I just got for Father's Day. Um,
Excellent.
as a gift. My kids know me and they give me a gift. Oh, and bitters. I did add bitters. Yeah.
That's the secret ingredient here is just enough Angostura bitters to make it taste Nice. And you can make it sweet. I use 7-Up. I like sweet. And you can also use club soda. Fever Tree is my go-to. Or you
That's
can
what I
mix a
didn't
little.
do. I was going, should I do a little
Yeah.
bubbly? And then I been brought club soda, and then I was like, nah, I just want the booze. So
And you get to balance it. It's kind of a science experiment too. We're going to be talking about, I think, some mad scientists later this year. And if you want to bring out your inner titrator, put a little bit of sweet, a little bit of the club soda to balance it or to moderate it, just don't use tonic. I have made that mistake before because this can looks an awful lot like their little blue
yeah,
can that
that's
is
a
tonic.
different taste.
No, that's not what you want. Anyway, so my contribution tonight to the Sherlock tale, um, use whatever brandy you have on hand. This is a Wisconsin brandy. It doesn't need to be aged. You're not going to taste it. That's the whole point.
Yeah, it's I figure I have the E and J brandy here. That's because that's what I had in the house.
Yep.
So I just use that. It's fine.
I love E&J Blue.
Nothing
That's my
fancy.
go-to
Nothing
drink.
fancy.
Yeah.
I didn't need that. So
Yeah, but I will say the thing about brandy and the reason that this is our drink tonight is that in particular, the Hound of the Baskervilles elevates brandy from a drink to a magical elixir, a restorative.
yeah.
What's Lestrade do? They force brandy down Sir Henry's in between his teeth. Get that flask in there.
Turns
And
out that's what Lestrade had in his hip pocket. So
yeah, yeah. Well, as long as he has his pants, he'll have his brandy flask. And as long as he has his brandy, he may not have any more pants. But um, the uh, the quote that I love from this story is, another sip of that brandy and I can do anything. Something like that. Um, Sir Henry is revived, and not only is he revived, he's like, let's go get that.
I have more.
Yeah, yeah, on the more. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, for more.
Just another one.
Yeah.
And you'd think what if you really wanted to be evil, what you could do is you could have the Hound wear one of those little Burmese dog
Uh-huh.
dog what are they, barrels around the neck
Yeah.
so that it restores them, then it kills them, then it restores them, then it kills. Yeah.
Well, um, it works off me. And it was interesting. The last Pickwick Papers episode we just did, there's an advertisement in the Pickwick Advertisers for brandy, and it's basically an advertisement for brandy as a medicine. Is what
Yeah.
it is. So not even
It really
drink it
it
and
really
enjoy it
works.
as booze. It's just like,
Mhm.
oh no, this is certified to help with all these ailments, and that's what the whole advertisement was for.
Well, by the third or fourth old fashioned, you will not be feeling any pain.
It is the best cure for my arthritic hip, let me tell you.
Mm.
The let's hear about this project you did, this re-serialization of the Hound.
Yeah.
I love this. When was this? I wish
So
I'd known you then. I don't wish I'd known about it.
yeah, okay. So you actually knew about the Stanford project.
Yeah.
When I began my project, I didn't know about the Stanford exercise.
Yeah, that's
So,
when they mailed these to everybody with a few
yep.
stories, and they did the Hound in the 9 parts.
And
So
I wish I had known about that. I can't imagine the expense
really cool. Yeah.
that this was mailed physically
Yeah.
to each person, and it's a strand reproduction. They got special permission to print it. But yeah, so they did a physical reproduction, and I believe the project in 2019 was the first digital serialization. And so it was delivered on the first Friday of the month. And so I set a timer for this, and it would send out PDFs of the original Strand issues, including all of the illustrations except for one, which was it was Sherlock Holmes illustration that we discussed. I put that at the back of that.
You held off on that. Interesting.
No, what's great is I edited the editors and I put it at the back of that or at the beginning of the next chapter when it's revealed, rather than at the end of the previous one where it's like, who could it be? Speaking of that moment, if you'll recall, there was a specific smoking implement
Yeah.
that was occurring then. It was it Bradley's on Oxford Street?
Bradley's of Oxford. Yeah.
Like that it was monogrammed on his cigarette that it says Bradley's of Oxford Street. If anyone has one of those cigarettes, I will buy it from them for $1.
Bradley's was fictitious, so
Okay.
you'd have to have it made, but there's
Well,
a lot of cigarette smoking in Sherlock Holmes.
yeah.
The pipe becomes famous, but oh, there you go.
I
Joining.
don't know. I don't smoke. I do other things. Sorry.
All right, Hunter.
There we go. What I said is I'm Violet Hunter S. Thompson.
I love that. That's a great costume to wear. Put a dress on and that
There you
get up and you're,
go. Well, and if I didn't feel like being Gilligan, I could be the skipper. So this is a small riff on my Dayton presentation of my Sherlockian evolution. I wear many hats.
So when you did the reserialization of the
Yes.
Hound, and you just was it just a like a Substack kind of thing, just an email to everybody?
It was an email. So I didn't want to put it out into the ether. I wanted it to be a discussion. And so we had threaded conversations of people who had never read The Hound before, people who had read it before but had never stopped at the cliffhangers. And boy, is that a different experience, as
Yeah.
you've all discovered. If you don't have that next page to turn, it's torturous. It's not torturous in a bad way, but I would describe it as almost sensual, where it's like your interest is being piqued and piqued and piqued at each moment. And that's one of the things that I think is lost when we don't read it in serial, is that instant gratification of turning the next page. It's the binge watching on Netflix.
Yeah.
It's very different.
Yeah.
And so we had started it in, I believe it was April of 2019. It was 130, I can't do math, but not in my mind. I can do it on a computer. But 130 something anniversary, 20 something. It wasn't a round number, but it was close anniversary. But we did it in the months that it was issued, so that the December issue was in December. And so we ended up doing that as the pandemic closed all around us. And so by March of 2020, schools were closed. The public transportation was shut down. Work stopped. Everyone basically went home, and they said, you're just going to be there for a week or two, right? By April of 2020, we were all going stir crazy because this wasn't stopping. And this was the climactic finale, the denouement of the Hound of the Baskervilles. And I don't know that you can get any more claustrophobic than I was. And so it was a unique experience in time, I think.
Right.
And yeah, so.
And that's when that's what brought about Biblio Ventures that we were doing. That's when, because the pandemic, we had to close down. That's when I started Sundays with Dracula. That's led to all these shows. And now Monday.
Yeah. And I met Sherlockians through the reserialization project that I never would have met before. I interacted with Scott Monty and Burt Walder for the first time, like outside of just consuming. We chatted about it and made an advertisement for folks to join in 2019. And we were all trying to figure out, is our Scion Society done? Are we meeting? Are we going virtual? And for many of our members, it was a trying experience because meeting in person was no longer safe. If you'll recall, before there was a vaccine, many of us were protecting others by not going out in public, by not interacting with them. And we have a lot of older Sherlockians, and how do you protect them? They don't want to do Zoom, but yeah. So anyway, that was all part and parcel of that project, and it really turned into something different, and it really was a connection in a dark time.
Yeah. And it's been a way for us to, for us at the Rosenbach to start these communities around authors and books that we've been able to continue, and people are still interested in this, and it enables us to broaden our audience and have it all over the place. All right. Definitely. Everybody watching, if you have questions tonight, throw them in the Q&A function of the Zoom interface. Don't just put them in the chat because it's too hard for me to find them. It's not like I can't read everything in the chat. So if you put them in the Q&A, we'll do questions tonight. If you guys have a lot of questions to ask about the Hound and Sherlock, good. Throw them all in there. I'll answer questions all night instead of doing other things that we could talk about. That's totally fine by me. So you can take control of this show with your questions if you so choose. Max, let me start by you asking you a question and to give your impressions of the Hound. Well, first, let's do 2 parts. Number one, do you have a first time reading the Hound that you remember? And then number two would be about your impressions of the Hound, rereading it now, and what we've done on this show.
Yeah, I think Hound was one of the first pieces of Conan Doyle that I ever read, but I never finished it when I was younger. It was just not my jam. I didn't understand the context. I think I was a little young for it when I started, maybe 9, 10. And I mean, that's just, I wouldn't say that's the ideal range. I think you need to have a little more context in your life about why would somebody pretend to be someone's sister, you know?
Yeah, some people love it right off the bat when they're kids, and some people like me, I
Yeah.
didn't get it until I was older. Yeah.
Well, let me point out this edition. So we're going to talk about, right, the adaptations of the Hound, right? I've got a 9-year-old at home, and I would never suggest that she go out and read Hound of the Baskervilles. But I will tell you what we've been reading. Hound of the Baskervilles pop-up book.
That's awesome.
And so this is the Hound on the Moor in front of a full moon, because it's always full, right? And so this one, it runs about, I think, 20 to 25 bucks. It's from Canterbury Classics, and it's fantastic. And it's got the real text. Like, there are summaries and synopses of the actual content of the story, but not in a way that's maybe as brutal as the original. And so if you're trying to introduce kids to Sherlock Holmes, that's a great, I mean,
Classics Illustrated was, years ago. Yeah.
Right. And so she loves this one. She's got one from Alice in Wonderland too, but we've gone through Alice in Wonderland in the full text. But she loves to do the pop-up while I'm reading to her. Yeah. So yeah. And so that's kind of my story. I guess I would say that my first experience with Hound of the Baskervilles, like true experience, was through audio drama. There was I think it's Roger Rees did
I have that one's a good one. Yeah.
a 1988 adaptation. It was the sort of proof of concept for Burt Coules and and as Madeline just aptly pointed out, of course you knew it, Madeline. Burt Coules, I think, has one of my favorite series adaptations. It's the BBC audio drama.
I just listened to their Hound last week. Yeah. Do it. Yeah.
Well, they have 2 versions of the Hound, right? They've got Roger Rees, and then they've got the one from Clive Merrison, or that Clive Merrison did. And you've asked this question, I think, to other panelists, that was, what is the best adaptation of the Hound? And I think in the chat, I've seen others mention this too. The audio drama, to me, is so far the best adaptation, because it still leaves you with room in your imagination for the horror of the beast. And yes, Wishbone is very, like, it's in the pantheon. I love the Wishbone adaptation too.
We watched that too. Yeah.
We watched the entire series during the pandemic, and most people don't know this, but Slobbery Hound is not the only adaptation of Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. There is a Scandal in Bohemia adaptation, a dogged expose. Hopefully you got turned on to that, Ed. I think I posted that in our Facebook channel. So,
well, I'm old enough. They were shows like for my kids, so even my oldest. So yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I was a contemporaneous viewer, but I didn't catch all of them, and I don't think I saw that one. So,
well, that's great. All right, now part 2.
Yeah.
what was your impression like reading it this time? And I mean, you had takes that you were giving in the chat as long as having fun. So what was your
No,
take
the
this
thing
time?
that was different about this was that I was having my hand held by some of the experts in the world on Sherlock Holmes and Hound of the Baskervilles
Yeah.
and Arthur Conan Doyle, right? And so I got so much more context than I would have had just reading it on my own. And this isn't an ad for you. It's just it is true. It is that you are reading this in a way that's never before been possible. That I am reading this in a way that's never before been possible. I'm hearing and seeing things, having assumptions corrected, where on your own you don't read it in the same way. You don't pick up all of the nuances that you and other guests may have discussed, and I just glossed right over some important detail
Hmm.
that, like there was a discussion about the school that the Stapletons ran, and was that epidemic. I always assumed that the epidemic was, something that turned him into a villain, but could he have been a villain all along? And I
Oh
think it was
yeah.
implied in the story that he's just a villainous character, right? He's
Yeah.
an abuser and a
And that epidemic that happened was more likely due to his neglect of the kids
or malfeasance.
caused it to happen.
Hmm,
And, hey, the kids get sick and die. Guess what? I keep the fees.
right.
And,
And he
and,
comes up with the next big
yeah.
idea.
And then
Yep.
he skedaddles.
The other thing that your co-hosts, but also just a thorough rehashing of these chapter parts allows is to really sink into the moments. And so visualizing what the Baskerville Manor looked like, and how um, how important that scene setting is, that when Doyle or Watson is writing those scenes, in order to get us to transport ourselves, he uses some really evocative descriptions and words that, again, you experience it, but you don't dwell on them until you have a
Mhm.
discussion about it. And someone goes, I really like this passage. And you're like, oh, yeah, I really did. Or like, this one is like, oh, yeah, yeah, that really did give me a fuller picture. Whereas in
Yeah.
my mind, I'm just visualizing it when I read.
Yeah. Janine in the chat said that even being able to have someone articulate your own vague thoughts has been cool. Like, I feel this, but I can't figure out why. And then a co-host will feel the same, but explain it. And that's what we try to do. And it's what I call conversational annotation. So,
Mm,
I mean, you could go conversational explication as well. Sometimes, I mean, to differentiate between
sure.
those two, but that's what we're doing in a way that makes it relatable to people.
There's two other things, real quick. I don't want to dwell too much on this one, but real quick, there's two other things that I appreciated about this forum, and that is the chat and your kindness. The chat brought out aspects that I never considered, because when you read as yourself.
Hmm.
Others were experiencing the passages or the characters in either slightly or sometimes very different ways, and had different takes. And it makes you think about how you got to your impressions. And the kindness, I will say, is that a lot of times in our Sherlockian discussions, we forget that there are people that are new to the scene, that are new to Sherlock Holmes. This may be their first Sherlock Holmes novel, maybe their first Sherlock Holmes at all. And you make a point of not ruining things for them, like talking about, oh, of course, we all know
Yeah.
blah. And you've also been, very careful with spoilers. We'll talk about that in the next episode. I've heard you say many times.
Yeah.
And it is a kindness, because yes, these spoilers are 123 years old. Finally, I did the math. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I did the math. But that doesn't mean that it won't affect you if you're reading it and someone says, well, in the next chapter, they're going to die.
Yeah. There are
So
times when you could throw spoilers out the window because it's like it has been that long. And I'm trying to talk about a book here, and there's no way I could talk about it without it. But it's what's great about this format is that we can hold off on that and try to experience it, in bits and not do that thing. And
yeah,
I just, and it's for us long timers and who have read it so many times, it's this, it's also this kind of selfish way that we get to relive it through your first time reader eyes, which we love, which I do with my kids all the time. But I've told this story many times, Al, like my kids read like Lord of the Rings for the first time and something
Oh yeah.
happens and they don't know that something's that's characters gonna that's not gonna happen, or Jane Eyre, and I would like I would sit and near them while they were while they were reading, sometimes in the same room, and when I knew they were getting to like a certain chapter in Jane Eyre, and I was like,
Yeah.
yeah,
I do the same thing.
yeah.
We were,
So
my 9-year-olds, we reread or read through the Hobbit and then watched the Hobbit movies for each of the sections. Obviously the book is better, but it's very different and it's a different experience. And then we have not gone to the Fellowship, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, because
yeah.
I think that's a little older, but I think the Hobbit is perfect for an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Lord of the Rings is probably early teens or even 11, 12.
My kids didn't know Star Wars spoilers after for that hitting the Empire and
Hmm.
until we watched Empire. And that was like
Okay.
the greatest thing to be able to keep that from them, who the father is. I'm not even gonna say it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was
No,
great to be able to do that.
it's a great reveal. They've heard the phrase "Luke, I am your father," but they don't know who said it.
Because I mean, I saw it in the theater, and that's when
Yeah.
I found out. So all right, we have a question already. Lauren asks, we already talked about, but I think there could be more to say. What was Doyle's purpose and what did he accomplish by having Holmes out of the picture so long?
Well, great question. And I'm going to answer this as Watson. So, no, wait, sorry. On the Moor, that's not Watson. That's Watson on the
There
Moor.
you go. Watson on the Moor.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things. You learn things as you read through these stories that, the bowler, the coquette, not appropriate for the countryside. I mean, it's okay, but you're wearing your tweed. You're wearing your hound's tooth in particular on this episode. Um, So, yeah, I think that this is, and I've said it in the chat before, but I would emphasize that one of the things is that we follow the trail of evidence along with Watson. We are Watson in this story. And if Holmes were there to spoil our fun, to correct us at our every turn, it would be very much like the opening
Yeah.
scene, which is lovely, lovely, right? Looking into a polished silver coffee pot. I noticed that
Maybe.
you've been examining a stick, right? And it's, he's just too smart.
Yeah.
And so part of the fun is getting there with Watson. We think it's Barrymore. We think it's the convict, or convict, as we would say in Dickens land. We think that we know what's going on, but we're not sure. Whereas Holmes has had this solved from the second chapter.
Holmes knew it was a live dog as soon as he heard about the boots
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
figured it
And
out. So
right. Rudy, you beat me to the typing of if it bleeds, we can kill it. If it
yeah,
bleeds, it can die. That from Predator. And
yeah.
that's very much I think a callback to this sort of is it a ghost? If it's a ghost, we're all doomed. But no, it's mortal.
Yeah.
And so therefore we know it can die.
That was
Um,
probably a Shane Black line that he added to the Predator when they called him in to spice up
there you
that
go.
that
There you go.
Predator script. But the and I agree with that. And then Watson we're because we're Watson anyway, so he takes us along that investigation. But I also but I think it had to be maddening for original readers. But then it serves the purpose of we get to continue that journey longer where this could be a supernatural creature and all these weird things are happening without Sherlock there to already explain it away or by his actions lead us to know that this probably isn't supernatural.
Mhm.
And
But we have doubts.
when he
We have
comes on the
doubts.
scene, he
Yeah,
throws it all out on the table right away. It's like, oh
yeah,
yeah, it's Stapleton, it's a dog, it's
right. I'm
and
glad you've finally got there, Watson.
yeah,
But but also Watson is correcting Holmes. Holmes is not infallible in this. And in fact, I would argue that this is another one of those stories where Holmes thinks he's smarter than he is. And he puts his client into extreme danger. In fact, in one instance, he killed his client, right? That in this story.
Yeah.
And he was so happy to discover that it wasn't Sir Henry, spoilers. Um, but then he puts Sir Henry right back in danger
Yeah.
as bait.
Didn't
And so,
factor on the fog.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
um,
Well, and I actually I think that's a lovely piece of dramatization, is that in spite of Holmes being supernatural in many ways, preternatural, right? That he's got abilities that go well beyond what you
yeah,
typically think of as a human
got
capability.
superhero abilities,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And out on the moor, he's wearing a cape. So, he's got all the superhero uh riz, as we like to say, as we, youngsters say.
Yeah.
And in spite of that, he can't plan on the fog. You know,
Yeah.
he doesn't plan to not have fog, but he's like, well, if we're going to pull this off and Henry's going to live, this fog has to wait until we just made it in time. Like, and that's masterful. That is um,
And
it's the gorillas in the mist, or
it
gorillas in the room.
it shows that kind of unknown factor that can be dangerous in an older Gothic work, in that, as brilliant as Sherlock can be, there are things that he can't know until they happen. And they did not have the technology then to,
Right.
meteorological, technology to be able to predict when fog banks would come in. And
Or where the moon would rise.
yeah, well, that they would know. I mean, they would know about the moon
No, I'm
and those
talking
kinds of
about Holmes
calculations.
just
Oh,
absolutely not even knowing, like, the sun sets over here, the
but
moon
he
rise.
does. But he does. Come on, we put that to bed a long time ago. It's literally only the first story that happens, and then
Well,
clearly he's a polymath by sign
oh
of,
yeah.
like,
No,
right
I'm
away.
just saying that yes, knowledge of astronomy, none, right?
Yeah,
But I'm just saying that this
except
is
that it was
entirely
because he's
entirely consistent with that, right? Is that he
yeah.
doesn't even know the moon's behind him. Knowledge of looking around, zero.
um one of the things that really
And
hits me.
can I just say, Roz, you win again. You win. You win. He missed that factor.
There you go. Mist, M-I-S-T. Um, for those watching the recording, this is all in the chat, and you'll get the chat. I send it with the recording, so as you've seen them. One of the things that I love about this, and I'd kind of thought about this before, but it really, really came home well developed this time, is that as a Gothic story, and this is first and foremost a supernatural Gothic story that then becomes a Sherlock Holmes tale in the way Doyle's putting it together. And that, so in a sense, what it becomes is a kind of farewell to supernatural Gothic horrors at the end of the 19th century, right? Like, Holmes is, now we have this supernatural Gothic tale, but Holmes is the rational modern man who reveals the superstitious horrors for what they really are: human evil. Now, that's something that also goes back to early, 18th century Gothic tales like Anne Radcliffe, where Mr. Udolpho and the Italian and things like that, where it was revealed at the end that it was a bad guy making
Yeah.
people believe this stuff.
Or Scooby-Doo, right?
It's the
Where
Scooby-Doo
all the
ending.
apparitions, yeah.
Yeah. But I think this story kind of double downs on that.
Yeah. Attorneys General. Yeah.
In that it really kind of says this is the way that we're moving now. Now there's other things going on too, about the atavism and this kind of anxiety for things coming up, and this belief in the supernatural in this story specifically by some of the characters blinds them to the real evil lurking among them.
Definitely.
There's two kinds of horror stories, I mean, generally. and two kinds of monster stories, I should say. I got this from John Carpenter. Used to talk about this all the time. There's inside monster stories and outside monster stories.
Hmm.
Some monster stories are, that's the monster is out there in the darkness, and it's going to get you, and we have to band together to protect ourselves from the monster. And then
Jason.
some, and then some genius, like, at prehistoric time, sitting around a fire, said, "Hey, let me tell the monster story." And everybody's like, "Go ahead." And he's like, "And there's this monster, and he's somewhere here in the light around the fire, one
And
of
it's you.
and that kind of monster story, this Hound gets to really play on, because everybody thinks the monster is outside and it's some supernatural force, and then what they
Right.
come to learn is it's one of their community. And
I I think Sherlock Holmes knew that all along.
Sherlock knows it from the beginning, but we
Well,
don't
and
know
I
it,
mean,
you know.
he never had any doubt
No.
that it was, why would what was the line? Why would anyone need a an agent, in the realm of here and now?
Yeah.
I'm totally butchering it, but why would you need some agent to do your work if you were in the city? If you're a ghost, right? And the other piece that I think we touched on, I think it was Anastasia that said it, was this science and rationality versus human nature and chaos. And there's the triumph of rationalist thought, of
Yeah.
science, of electricity, and that, Sir Henry is bringing the modern day to this place, this not prehistoric, although there are prehistoric connections, but
That's
ancient,
yeah.
right? And so there's this contention between the the realm of science, discovery, Victorian hubris, and still this curse in the blood, this land that is taking back something from the scientific
Yeah.
world. And that's also really fun.
Yeah.
That's also like that's one of the pieces that I love the most about this book is that it's at a time in our human history that never can be repeated.
Yeah. And for me, this, the thing that I always come back to with this story, that I see threaded all through, this atavism, this first supernatural threat on the moor, but there's also the threat of this madman Selden on the moor, who's like a
Mm,
wild beast, and he represents that savage coming back to hurt us. Um, the Hound is a threat from the past, literally in the Baskerville family,
yes.
and it's proven false. But the real threat is not just that it's someone among us, Stapleton, but it's who Stapleton represents, and that he's this moral reversion. He
Mhm.
is this thing that the Victorians were
He's a genetic
so,
throwback.
yeah, that they had so much anxiety about, is that they really felt like with Darwinism, if that we evolve, we can devolve. And what if some atavistic things from the past comes back, especially in the fin de siècle time in the 1890s, that bestial part will come back to haunt us. And then it all kind of, what it kind of winds up being for me is this is a story. This isn't just a Gothic story. This is a Gothic Darwinism story. It's a story
Mhm.
about the Darwin being Gothic, the theory of evolution being Gothic in and of itself. But of course, it's a wrong reading. Like, it's
Right.
completely false reading of how evolution works and the whole
Yeah.
accident.
And I was going to say, I
Through.
think that, phrenology and the whole racist theory behind eugenics and all of that stems out of this, assumption that we understand more than we do, that we've solved it. And
Yeah,
that, um, and I don't mean to throw Doyle under the bus or to put him in a category by himself, but a lot of times we get this hand wavy, it was of this time, but Doyle believed a lot more in pseudoscience than I think we want to believe. And so we give him a pass on things like, you know, um, attributing behavioral characteristics to appearance, and in many cases wrongly. He even contradicts himself by saying that, Sherlock Holmes has less cranial development than Moriarty would have expected, right? And so in that way, I think that he's going through an evolution and not necessarily fully buying in, but Dr. Mortimer certainly was a skull analysis racist.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds on that, but um, it was definitely something that connects some really bad things to this story, in a way that I don't love, but we have to acknowledge. Going a little bit back, speaking of
Okay, go ahead.
genetic, repressed genetic uh, traits, um, you asked a question in our discussion topic, which was the lasting effect of the story. And I would have expected this was a blockbuster, right? Like this book and this serialized story were it. It was a bestseller. It was printed more times than the Strand had ever made print runs before. It was used to sell American copies. The manuscript was broken up because it was so valuable to them that the American audience was loving this, and that selling the book was an even bigger source of revenue, and it made Doyle a star. Um, he was a well-known author. He was respected and liked, especially among the erudite, the royal aristocracy. Um, but this was one of those stories that everybody read and everybody knew about, and at the time um, it was the biggest thing since sliced bread. Although I don't know if they'd invented sliced bread yet, but it may have been the biggest thing before sliced bread.
I used to know that
Um,
because there's an answer to that. Now I forget it, but I used to know
I
that.
know.
You can look it up
It's
online when was sliced bread invented, and there's
spoiler alert, we've had sliced bread. It just wasn't mechanized through
yeah.
our human history. So, um, but the lasting effect to me of a blockbuster,
1928, two people. It's already in the chat.
of course. I love all of you, by the way. Every single person who is in the chat right now, even if you're just a lurker and you're reading or you're not even reading, but you are supporting really important and really fun events at the Rosenback by subscribing to this
Good. All right.
project. Oh yeah, I'll let you do your.
Yeah, let's get back to it. Well, there's another good question here. Were you finished with that point? Because I
Well, the
agree with
one
you.
thing I was going to say is that we don't have a copycat. What I think happens is Doyle goes back to write the the remaining Sherlock Holmes
Yeah,
stories, and so we don't need the next big, who's the next big killer dog, right? I can't think of a ton other than like
yeah,
Cujo. But what you actually jogged in my memory was, my opinion is that we went from these creepers, right? Like that was actually a genre, was the creeper, right? Um, to real monsters, and real in quotation
yeah.
marks. I only do one quotation mark set, otherwise that's really weird. But we went from creepers to monster movies very quickly after the Hound. So the
Mhm.
Hound's adaptations, yep, certainly Cujo. But we went from the Hound to things like the Universal Pictures horror
Yeah.
very quickly.
Well, what's interesting is that this Hound of the Baskervilles is just 4 years after Dracula, Stoker's Dracula,
Hmm.
and which
Hmm.
is still exists in their time, and readers know this. So it's kind of you've got
Yeah.
these two things going on: one completely supernatural monsters, and the
Hmm.
explained, supernatural. And for a time, then, well, when movies hit and when they realized they can do this, the kind of supernatural monsters went out again. Um,
Hmm.
and then we have all the great Universal and other monsters, but there's also other things in there like Jekyll and Hyde, and
A
so
question in the chat that I can actually answer because I love this letter. Um, in March or April of 1901, a line to you, dear old mammy, to say that I have had much good out of my 2 days here, where I have slept soundly at last. All goes well in every other way. On Tuesday, I give a dinner at the Athenaeum Club. My guests are the Langmans, Magee Griffiths, St. Winston Churchill, Barry, Anthony Hope, Norman Hapgood, Cranston of Edinburgh, blah, blah, blah. Rather a good team, I think. Adieu, my dear. Excuse this short scribble. Fletcher Robinson came here with me, and we are going to do a small book together. The Hound of the Baskervilles. A real creeper.
Letter to his ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Dear old
before he
mammy.
knew that Sherlock was going to be involved.
Yes. Yes.
And before he met Fletcher Robinson's driver,
Valet, driver,
Baskerville, like
Baskerville.
a month before or 2 months before he met him, they already had this. So
Yes.
who was named Baskerville.
If you don't, I
And
think,
then
wasn't it
later
Henry?
spent his life saying that they used my name, but actually
Yeah.
the name actually came before you. And
Yeah. So the last thing I'll say about that is there were
you can memorize passages like that. I can't memorize anything. That's why
no.
that's why I kept out of acting, because I can't memorize things.
I love the real creeper. But I will say to people who may be interested, the relationship between Churchill and the Athenaeum Club. I'm probably saying that wrong. I apologize
That's a
to
name. No,
the goddess,
fine.
and also all the Brits. But the
You think they
relationship
say like Athenium or something in England? I don't know. Because
Athenaeum,
it's Athenaeum?
I
Athenaeum?
don't know.
Uh,
But I just call it Athena's house. And so anyhow, Churchill asks Doyle to speak and to give to chair a speech that he's giving.
yeah.
Then Doyle asks Churchill to be there at another event in his club. And so there's this sort of mutual appreciation society before Churchill was such a big deal. And so when Churchill becomes more and more popular, he's actually, still reading Sherlock Holmes stories
Yeah.
after Doyle passes. But it's just one of those, he smoked Trichinopoly cigars, it's just, there's so many, intertwinings there.
You can go to
Athenium.
the timeline of everything used to be, very convoluted because we didn't have dates for some of the letters. Some of the letters aren't like that letter to his mother isn't dated, but now we know the truth. And the first biographer of Doyle, well, not the first biographer, but the biographer that the family hired to write a biography of him, John Dixon Carr, got that date wrong. And he dates that a month earlier than it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do know because now his diary became available. So now we have all the dates. And he went with Fletcher Robinson on Friday, April 26th through Monday, April 29th. And then Doyle went to London to the Athenaeum Club, which he had recently been elected to on 8 March 01, but for a dinner with Churchill, Anthony Hope, James Barry, Edmund Goss, and others on April 30th. So what's interesting when you get all the dates together and when he first met with Robinson, and then when he finally goes to Dartmoor to really, to kind of, look at the lay of the land, he already knows that he had been there before. But the Hound is conceived on April 29th with Robinson. And then he sends the letter to his mother and a letter to the Strand, in which he also calls it a real creeper. And then it becomes a Sherlock Holmes story. He doesn't visit Dartmoor until May 31st to June 2nd. And what it means, though, is that, and then when he visits, then he's already about halfway done the story. It took Doyle 6 to 7 weeks to write Hound of the Baskervilles. That's it. It's the way he could write, and it's not just Sherlock Holmes, because he could write Sherlock stories like his second wife, Jean, like he said, sometimes there would be people over and we'd be having company and he would be sitting there writing a story. He could just write, and 6 to 7 weeks is what it took.
That's a real superpower
to write
really
Hound of the Baskervilles. So
and the language that he uses too is crafted. It's not dashed off. It's and as you know, and we may be discussing the manuscript in a bit, but the manuscript is very clean. Please go.
I have a question. We have a question I want to get to. Somebody asked, why do you think Doyle didn't have anyone witness Stapleton's death? They could have watched him sink into the mire, like the ponies referenced earlier. Was Doyle thinking of having him reappear at some point? We don't really know for sure that he's dead, right? This is a great question because I felt like I should have addressed this in the last episode, and we really did. The effects of Stapleton, of not seeing his death. And it's interesting because most adaptations show it. Most adaptations
Yeah,
give you the payoff of Stapleton
he
dying
gets it.
because that's a movie thing anyway. Like you have to show. You can't leave people with that question afterwards.
When
With
you say it's a
Doyle,
movie thing, it is both a good rule of screenwriting,
yeah,
right? It's sort of the
yeah.
Chekhov's gun, right? You can't show the gun in the first scene and not have it fired by the third. You you can't leave it open-ended like that. And that there are actual rules, like in the Hays Code, when it's adapted,
Yeah,
under the Hays Code, you
have to
must
show. Yeah,
show the evildoer getting a comeuppance.
yeah.
They had to be punished. Like this was actual rules rather than screenwriting rules.
So in this case, though, in Hound of the Baskervilles, Holmes just assumes that Stapleton dies, and I think Doyle's intention is for the reader to believe that. So of course he couldn't have survived. Now, this is due to movies and sequels and things like that, that we live in that age when people, the same thing as with Dracula all the time. People are like, oh, do you think because of the way Dracula dies at the end, he really meant Dracula to not be dead? No, Stoker means Dracula to be dead. Um,
Yeah.
but so we often are suspicious when we don't see the body.
Mhm.
We don't see the actual act that maybe this person is still out there.
It is
Uh,
very dissatisfying.
I like it for this story because I think the effect we get is that just like there are questions raised, and we don't quite know answers to certain questions, then
Mhm.
that fits in well with this kind of whole, like, this is a mystery and you're not going to get it all tied up because it's not unusual for sometimes people to not be caught at the end. I mean, engineer's thumb, they just escape. Nobody ever sees them again.
The
Doyle
orange
gets
pips.
interested in all in 500 pips. Well, there and yeah, he's like, oh, we're pretty sure the ship sank. Well, but did it?
Well, and yeah, and I got a letter from that these bad guys got shanked later in Europe. Who did it? Who
Yeah,
sent the letter?
and Greek interpreter. So Doyle likes this idea that I'm not going to neatly tie it up in a bow for you. And maybe it's because of the way that he gets to leave continuing mysteries.
I'm pulling a reverse
You're
Scott Monty
super
as you
hound. There
as
you
you
go.
discuss it. Um, yeah, I don't think that there was any intent to have a sequel. He didn't leave the door open to Stapleton necessarily being like a chief rival, although I honestly feel like Stapleton's a better villain than many of the other canonical
And the
villains.
way he set him up so far, it would not be unusual for Stapleton to have an escape plan and to have people think that he went off into the moors.
Mhm.
Now, the fact that Sherlock doesn't say anything like that kind of leads me to believe that Doyle doesn't think that, and it's not part of the story. So,
But Doyle is also adept at leaving the door open. He doesn't necessarily know it, but even if somebody falls off a waterfall, right, he could easily reverse his shoes and just hop right out of there. Um, so I don't think it's out of the realm of the possibilities that it was having such great success that he considered it. But I don't think he wanted to come back to this story. I think he considered it done. But I
what's the
don't think
effect, though,
that,
for you? Like the fact that we don't see that, and Stapleton, we don't get to see that death. What do you think that effect is for you as a reader?
I think it's lacking. It leaves me wanting that closure. It leaves me wanting him to. What I want is the Die Hard ending. I want, I want Stapleton to be up to his neck in the mire. I want him to be calling for help and succor and somehow betray Holmes, and then they let him sink into the mire. And then I want to see his body. Somebody mentioned this. There are so many bog bodies, like the
Yeah.
museums in Ireland.
Yeah.
There's one that looks just like JFK. And so if you ever wondered where his body went, but I think here's the other thing is my least favorite part of Hound of the Baskervilles is that it continues the trend of cruelty to dogs, and I don't mean the Hound. There is no reason to kill Dr. Mortimer's curly-haired spaniel.
Hmm.
There is no reason. It serves no plot purpose whatsoever.
Yeah.
In fact, it's just tossed in there to be mean. And I mean, look, I'm gonna let him have a pass. Maybe there was going somewhere going with that, but he does that in the Study in Scarlet. He does that in Lion's Mane. He does that in, in this story. There are many other instances where the dog did nothing wrong. Sometimes they don't even do anything in the nighttime and they get blamed for it. So anyway, off my soapbox.
That's all right. I was really tempted to pull my Bog Bodies book off the shelf there. I have that famous book on that somebody mentioned Seamus Heaney uses to write poems. I have that too. All righty. You ready?
I'm
Um,
ready.
ready to get fancy because I'm going to make a special announcement. Um,
Please.
the You don't have to wait, everybody, until November for more Sherlockian content from the Rosenback. In November, we will begin our Sherlock monthly show and work through the rest of the canon, starting with Nora Woodbuilder, one story a month with a new co-host every month. It'll be fun, and bringing back our other co-hosts that we've already had to do certain stories. That'll be fabulous. In the meantime, at least this summer, we have 2 new special episodes that are going to air live on July 29th and August 26th, 2024, on the Detectives of the Hiatus, I'm calling it. When Sherlock Holmes left the pages of the Strand magazine after the adventure of the final problem, before Hound of the Baskervilles comes along 7-8 years later, magazine publishers rushed to find other detectives to fill the void left by Doyle's decision to send Sherlock over the Reichenbach Falls. So join us for 2 programs dedicated about 2 of these detectives, Loveday Brooke and Martin Hewitt. Our co-host will be the editor of Crime Reads and Baker Street Irregular, Olivia Rottigliano, who was just, brought into the Baker Street Irregulars this year in January. Olivia has written extensively on Sherlock and crime fiction at Crime Reads. You can look her up and find her great stories there. You can download, we'll have PDF, they're already there, PDFs of the stories we will read on the Sherlock Mondays page on the at rosenbach.org at Sherlock Mondays. I've already posted those PDFs for those 2 stories. And if you're already registered for Sherlock Mondays, you don't need to do anything. You'll automatically receive an announcement email later this week. There will be reminders about these episodes coming up as we get closer to the dates. They'll live stream on the YouTube channel, just like Sherlock Mondays episodes. So it'll be Monday, July 29th, Monday, August 26th at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll do it live, and then they'll exist there with the other episodes. The July one is The Experiences of Loveday Brooke, Lady Detective by C.L. Purkis, and we're doing the story, the first Loveday Brooke story, The Black Bag Left on the Doorstep, which was published in actually Ludgate Monthly in February 1893. And then on August, we'll do Martin Hewitt Investigator by Arthur Morrison, and his first story, The Lenton Croft Robberies, which was in the Strand magazine in March 1894. So Loveday Brooke, Lady Detective, Martin Hewitt Investigator, July and August. It's really exciting, I think, to read these stories that sought to replace Sherlock. I mean, this is the magazines are thinking, we need more detectives solving crimes. And the fact that one of them, Loveday Brooke, was the lady detective, as they call her, I love. Martin Hewitt is kind of almost like an anti-Sherlock in a sense, but he's still brilliant. But it's but you'll see when you read them, and it'll be really interesting to read these stories published while Sherlock was on his great hiatus this summer. That's our special announcement. More Sherlockian content. I couldn't imagine, Max, going through the summer without doing at least a couple shows, because I love doing this stuff. It's so much fun. So, and you're and another hat for you. I'll join you. I'll join you in
Speaking of
deer
the
stalking.
hiatus, Sherlock was
The
out
llama. There we go.
drinking tea with the llamas. So
Great llama.
that's another Sherlock reference there.
I also have a bowler. I have two top hats over there, but they're too far to reach. So
Understood.
this I keep in hand in reach always during Sherlock. So
I was really hoping that you were going to bring up Sherlock Jones, the famous
yeah.
hiatus detective. Yeah, there were a number. In fact, there was one I discovered while I was doing some research for this show, as a matter of fact. Um, John Kendrick Bangs wrote a very interesting Sherlock Holmes pastiche while Sherlock Holmes was still a going concern. Does anyone know in 1896 what I could be referring to?
Not sure, but I
I had
may.
not heard of this. It is the houseboat on the River Styx,
Yes, I have heard of this. Go ahead.
guided by or the pursuit of, I don't even remember who it was, but Sherlock Holmes is trying to find who was it? Napoleon? No, it was another dead person, um who, this is all in the afterlife because Sherlock Holmes has gone over the Reichenbach, right? So he is now in the afterlife solving crime in Hades. So I just was fascinated by that. But if you haven't read Raffles, that's another one that has very Doylean
E.W.
connection.
Horning, who is Doyle's
Brother-in-law.
brother-in-law,
Yeah.
wrote
And
those. Yeah, they all happened during the hiatus.
reading through the Raffles stories,
Not
actually,
all of
that's
them, but some of them, yeah.
yeah. Well, in many cases, there are instances in which Horning came up with plot devices that Doyle later used. And so the coming back from the dead trope happens, well, happens somewhere in those stories. I recommend you read them. Um, oh man, I love the chat. You all pull some good references. But John Kendrick Bangs was a name that was familiar to me because he wrote, I believe, Mrs. Raffles and R. Holmes, Raffles Holmes and Company, which was a pastiche of the Raffles stories. So Horning at the time was originally just tweaking Doyle's nose with the, anything you can do, I can do better sort of thing. But he's writing not detective stories, he's writing criminality stories. So his hero is a safecracker and burglar. And it's told in, anyway, not going to get too much into Raffles, but I think it's really fascinating to think of the way that a story is told from the perspective of someone investigating a crime and a caper that is someone trying to get away with a crime. And so there's some really interesting parallels, and I recommend it if you haven't read it.
If people look up Rivals of Sherlock Holmes, there was a whole big book series that Hugh Green, the brother of Graham Greene, put together, anthologies of different, detectives that were being published in magazines while Sherlock was going on, but primarily when Sherlock was off the scene. There were also, he has an American version, your other European detectives. I'll send out some info of this too in emails over the summer too, but that's a nice thing to read up on while we're waiting to get back to Sherlock with Norwood Builder in November, is to read these other, detective stories of the era, which are often quite good. And interesting, even if they're not good. So
Yeah.
we will
Well,
so that's
one other plug real quick. One of my favorites is Max Carados or
oh
Carados.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Because he is, if you're also interested in coin collection or coin collecting, numismatism, hypnotism, all of the above, it incorporates elements of that into the detective story.
And the early 19th century is when all the detectives, battling the supernatural come out too. So, which is real in the early 20th century. That's what I said.
Mhm.
It's so there's Carnacki and all these, so they're
Mhm.
investigating supernatural and they're real supernatural doings in these stories and these are detectives investigating them. There's a lot of fun things to read then. All righty, let's
Yep.
get back to um Hound, and I want to talk a little bit, and please, if you have questions, ask them. But right now, I want to mention, I want to talk a little bit about the manuscript for Hound of the Baskervilles, and then the publication of the novel, and I'll share images of our copy of the first edition of Hound of the Baskerville. We do not have any of the leaves of the manuscript for the Hound at the Rosenbach. And probably never will now because and there's a few still in private hands, and when they go up on for sale, they're a gazillion dollars. But there are only 37 leaves left of the manuscript. They think it was approximately 185 pages would have been the manuscript. I mean, we know that just from what we have and how long that is. There's a complete chapter 10 exists, and it's at the New York Public Library. The best way to find out about the manuscript is to go to Randall Stock's Best of Sherlock site, and he has information. The Best of Sherlock Holmes website. It's bestofsherlock.com, and he's got all kinds of manuscript information about it on there. And
His website is how I first started reading Sherlock Holmes as an adult. He has a best of list as well that is really, really valuable. That he's published, I think, 3 or 4 versions. I know, sidetracking. That's what I do.
that's okay. I just put the link for his site there, and you can, because what happened is to promote, and you mentioned this briefly, to promote the publication of the book in America. They decided, oh, here's a good plan. We'll take the actual manuscript pages of it, and
Mhm.
we'll put them on display in bookstores selling Hound of the Baskervilles.
They even have the label that was used
And
on
one of
some
them,
of the pages.
I'll show. Glenn Moranker, in one of the pages he has. I don't know if he.
37? Is it 37 or is no, he had 11, right? The
I don't know how
European.
many he has, but in one of them it has the label, and here it is. Um,
I meant the number. They're all numbered and indexed. And,
yeah,
and yeah.
and this is one of the pages that he has, and it's some interesting things on this in that well, at the bottom here you could see is the label, original manuscript sheet from the Hound of the Baskervilles by A. Conan Doyle, published by McClure Phillips and Company, New York. So this was like the label was put on the bottom of the page, and this is how it was displayed in the bookstore. I love on this one because it shows that after he had written this scene, he added something. And what he added was, my methods, apply them. Great famous line from this story. And that was that was on the second go through. He had already written it, and then he goes back and adds this to it. Great things you can discover about his composition process. But the best thing, and this is evident in all Doyle manuscripts, especially for Sherlock, is how relatively clean it is. He sits down, and this isn't a fair copy, people. This was first draft. This is how he writes it, and then does a read through and adds things. Sometimes he'll add more than one thing, or maybe maybe it's a couple read throughs in which he's added stuff. We can't know that exactly. And then he'd have it typed and then sent to the publishers. Um, Here's a page. This is one of the ones at the New York Public Library, and you pointed out this to me, Max, and I love this, is because this is when he wrote these poor peasants who are not content with a mere, and he had originally written spectral hound, and then he changes it to Fiend Dog.
Well, I will correct you just slightly. You are correct, but he doesn't go through one iteration. He actually, if you look closely, the next iteration is glowing Hound, and the third is Fiend Dog, which is what made it into the publication.
Yeah.
And so this is what we love about manuscripts.
He starts writing glowing here, right? He's got GL,
Yes,
yeah, and
yes,
then says, no, Fiend Dog.
yes.
I
And
love it.
because you, if it's published, it's published. It's more or less set in stone. But as Doyle's writing it, he's going, you know, what would be the scariest? Glowing? No, a fiend. And I love that. It's almost like you're looking over Doyle's shoulder when you read his manuscripts.
Well, it is published by Noons in England, and this is the first edition, as you have on your shirt there. This gorgeous, gorgeous cover. Um, uh, the um, the designer is Alfred Garth Jones. You can see the AGJ here. This beautiful Art Nouveau design here with the hound on top of this rock and the moon just, rising behind it. Note too the question marks. Ooh, look at that. Another shirt. Do you have a lot of Sherlock of Hound paraphernalia?
I may. I may actually have a statuette of the Hound as well.
I love
Yes.
these question marks. Like it's a Doctor Who, like on his
It's a whodunit. It's
there.
a mystery.
But this is the Rosenbach copy here, this copy that I'm showing. This is the one that we have in our collection, first edition. This is maybe a little clearer. It doesn't have the glare of the light as I was trying to take a photo of it. But I love the red, and I love this gold, and then the contrast with the black with just a little bit of gold going up the rock here. I think this is a really clever design and really arresting as you see it in a bookstore. Our copy was owned by J.M. Spurrier, Marston on Dove in Derby. And who was John Marston Spurrier. And this Marston on Dove was the Hall, Marston on Dove, Derbyshire. And Spurrier was the Lord of the Manor of Marston, patron of the livings of Marston, Scropton, and Fawston, J.P., High Sheriff, 1944. So the Spurrier family bought Marston Hall, where he had this in his library from the Duke of Devonshire in 1919. And you can look up Marston Hall, and there's a really nice PDF of the whole hall because it was to buy, but it's got no connections with the Hound. But it's just that's where our copy came from. And Doyle, we don't know if he knew him or not. So I mean, it's certainly not an inscribed by Doyle book. That's just the owner. And here it is, London, George News Limited, Southampton Street, Strand, 1902. Max, when was this published? And what is the curious thing about the publication of it?
Great question. That was April 1901, I believe, and it was the month before the final chapter came out.
Oh,
Those
oh two, sorry.
oh two, sorry, oh two, and
It
yeah,
wouldn't have
so
been the month. It would have been like it was published in April, and I think we even have the date, and it would have been
okay.
a certain number of days
So
before the issue of the Strand came out. It could have been as long as a week or two, but it's that
it's
that
very
close.
hard to pin down.
The
It's
point
very hard to
is
pin
that
down, but I will say
came out
between
first. Yeah.
between the second to last, where we are still in fear for Sir Henry's life, and the last installment, not the last chapter, but the last like chapter,
Yeah,
two
it comes
chapters.
out before the last installment. So
And
if
so
you
if you want to
really
find out
want to,
who wins, who loses, who draws, you could pay an extra, is it 6 shillings?
yeah, 6 shillings this book cost.
Which is, quite a bit, but not outlandish. 6 shillings is a day's pay for a laborer, right? In this day. And
Uh-huh.
so, think hundreds of dollars, not thousands in today's money, maybe. Um, but yeah, it's brilliant marketing. It is very reminiscent in my mind of what some of the like streaming services have
Yeah.
started doing, where you can pay to have access before it comes out on their streaming platform. Disney Plus has done it, Netflix is trying it, and it's also one of those things I wish I don't think I would have bought it. I can wait a month, right? But that cover is one of my all-time favorite covers of any
Yeah.
book ever. Any edition, and it has such a great story. I would have loved, yes, exactly.
It
Rudy
doesn't
hit it on the head.
it doesn't include all of the pageant illustrations. There's a select number of them in it. And
Mhm.
I find it interesting that this is the one that they chose because I love that this is the shadow of Sherlock Holmes. And maybe there's people who aren't reading The Strand and they're just buying the book. And it's just like the shadow of Sherlock is coming back into their lives
Mm,
with this book here. Stop the share there.
yeah. Well, so I held up my copy of it. I don't know if this is a first edition or not. Um, I like to call this the derpy dog
Yeah.
version. If you squint real hard, you can kind of make it look like the Noon's edition, but this one was only 13 bucks. But it's
It's
so
reminiscent
close,
of.
so close. I had to. I had to.
Well,
But I will share one of my recent finds, my favorite version of the Hound. Like, you know how it's really hard to get right the exact look of the Hound, and you think in your mind, like, how does the Hound look? I'm pretty sure they nailed it.
yeah. With the Chihuahua. What's the name of that publisher? They've got a bunch of them.
This
And
is Pulp the Classics,
yeah,
and this is made to look like a 60s
yeah,
pulp novel. Like even has the wear built into it.
yeah.
So I thought I was buying a used copy. It's, it's not. It's
There's a
fully.
Pride and Prejudice one that I have, and it's very much looking like the Colin Firth Darcy on the cover. I have the Alice in Wonderland one too, I think. I can't remember. I
Mm.
have a couple of them that are really, funny looking. So
Well, and I would also put it out there that it's not too late for you to own a manuscript. There is a Sign of Four manuscript that is up for auction soon, if not
this,
already
this
taking some.
week, yeah, it's a
Yeah,
couple days that
it's
sale.
Sotheby's.
Yeah.
So they take a nice hefty cut, but on something this expensive, that's only like 10 or 15%. Usually it's 40. So yeah,
Um,
good luck. May the odds be ever in your favor.
well, what do you think about Doyle reviving Holmes for this? In that he brings it out as another adventure, so it's not like he survived Viking back, but he's been absent for 7 years when he's starting to write this. Eight, I think it's almost 8 years when he publishes it.
93 to, yeah.
And uh then and for me it's
I'm
what
pro. I
too.
like it. If that's where you're going,
Well,
I appreciate his doing that.
what leads him to it is I think there's a lot of the Sherlock revival is going on with the Gillette play. The play
Yes.
that Gillette has put together with he took Doyle's play manuscript and then just rewrote it and then did his own thing. But it was a big hit in America and it opens in London or in England. I'm not sure where exactly, right around when the first issue of the Hound came out. So it's kind of
Garrick, I believe. Garrick Theater.
so
Oh no, sorry,
all
that's
of this
Broadway.
yeah, all of this kind of,
Yeah.
uh,
Lyceum.
attention is being paid to Sherlock. So Doyle knows it's going to be lucrative and also popular, with also a lot of readers will be interested in it.
And
Um,
American readers,
yeah,
these are busting doors. Like this is the hit play of the year. And in 1901, Gillette brought it to London. I think I shared a advertisement in one of these Strand issues for Gillette at the Lyceum.
yeah,
And so, we've got this perfect storm of marketing,
yeah.
right? I don't know how Gillette came to London to put it on, but it was just magnificent timing for Doyle
Well,
and his.
it was all planned. Like they
Yeah.
tested it out in America, and it was a big hit, and it worked there.
Mhm.
They knew all along that if it works, they're bringing it. And one of the early actors to play Billy, I'm not.
But
He wasn't in the American, but he was in
Billy the Page. Yeah.
Billy the Page was Charles
Charlie Chaplin.
Charles Chaplin. I think he may have been at the time.
Yeah,
Uh,
he was only Charlie later in life.
yes. Um,
Yeah,
but
well, and have you read any of Chaplin's discussion of Gillette?
no.
One of the reasons Chaplin thinks that the play was such a hit is that Gillette was just a wonderful performer. He didn't just have the look, he didn't just have the mannerisms, he had the it factor.
Yeah.
He was that generation's Sherlock Holmes, and there's no doubt about that. There's no contesting it in any way. Even was it Frederick Dorr Steele? All of his illustrations look just like
Yeah, he
William
uses
Gillette,
Gillette for the model more. He
and
doesn't
there's
really
a
use that.
reason.
He uses Gillette, or the stories he uses Gillette.
Yeah, that's America's Sherlock Holmes.
And for me, what happens is that we talk about the lasting effect of this story and how popular it is, but for me, Sherlock crosses over into greater pop culture fandom, not because of Doyle and this book and how good it is, but really because of Gillette. And that there's
Mhm.
another medium that people are attracted to. And it is true. More people would have, and by the time all kinds of Sherlock plays happen into the century, more people will wind up seeing Sherlock plays than wind up reading the books in most cases. The same thing happens with other people. There were more people with movies now. There are more people who will see a movie of Dracula or Frankenstein or another one of these, things than
By
will have
far.
read the book. And that's how it crosses over. That's the real popularization of it. We don't realize theater was that big then, and it was. And then
Oh, it was.
movies we recognize are that big. Theater, dramatic performance were like movies then.
Yeah.
And people went and flocked to them, and they were all kind of smaller productions of them. And that's the jump that Hound,
Mhm.
that it's at the time out of Hound that the jump in Sherlock Holmes happens, because Gillette is so successful and then goes on to perform this, I don't know how many hundreds of times, 1,000 times or something. And then H.A. Saintsbury takes over and performs the role like 1,400 times in different Sherlock Holmes plays. And but Doyle luckily wrote his greatest Sherlock novel, the one that's going to get the most eyes on it, because novels get more eyes on them than short stories. At the time, that Sherlock was exploding in pop culture. So
Mhm.
perfect
Yeah,
place.
it was a perfect storm. It was whatever media you prefer to consume Sherlock Holmes, or really anything in. He was in print magazines, serials, as we've talked about. He was a best-selling novel, right? If you could afford a novel, then that's the route you might go. He was in the theater, and so if you couldn't read, there were a lot of folks who could not read yet. Um, they could go to the theater and enjoy the same thing that all their reader friends were talking about. Dickens' day, a lot of folks would go to the pub and they'd sit around and they'd listen to the one person who might read the best read that issue of, one
Yeah,
of Dickens' works.
yeah.
And I'd love to imagine that there are families that would have their neighbors over and they'd be interested in the next Sherlock Holmes
And
installment.
that's Nunes's, goal with the Strand magazine, is that it is a family magazine, that anybody in the family can read it.
Great pictures. Great pictures.
Yeah, like he wanted a picture on every page. He didn't quite get that, but but it's still, there's so many illustrations in the Strand, and it becomes that kind of magazine, and it influences magazines after it because of that.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, and not too long after, Arthur Wantner, I believe, was Conan Doyle's like hand-picked
yeah,
actor to play Sherlock Holmes in the silent films that were being produced during
yeah.
Doyle's, lifetime.
I think the
And
Ellie
so
Norwood ones are
I,
first, but then
Eileen Norwood, yeah, but
then
I'm,
then
I'm
Wander, I think.
sure.
And Wantner's Vincent Starrett's favorite, I think.
Okay, yeah, I reversed them. Yeah, I wasn't around then like you were, Ed.
Really?
No, I'm just
Yeah. I'll,
no,
I'll
I wish I were. I wish I could have gone to see him in
we'll
the
drop
theater.
in my TARDIS one day and I'll take you there.
Yeah.
Because I'm the 40th Doctor, so everybody knows.
Oh, Doctor.
42nd, maybe I should say I should be. The
Good number.
Ross had an interesting questions about translation. She wants to know if we have any comments on translations of the Hound. I've never read them in another language, and I don't really know them. She put a link in the chat about the Irish translation of Baskerville. I don't know. We don't
How
have
do you
Rosenbach. We do have the Irish translation of Dracula at the Rosenbach that was, I can't remember when it was first published, sometime in the earlier-ish 20th century it was published, but I don't have any knowledge of translations.
Yeah, well, you have one right behind as I don't know if this works for the audience. You have one right behind you, Ed. Der Hound der Baskerville,
Well,
right?
yeah, and that's from the
Der
movie.
Hund,
That's actually from the
the
one of the
movie,
German movies, the second uh
right?
the Baskervilles Hound, it says. This is the poster for it, but it is, and it's a beautiful, beautiful poster.
Yeah,
Postcard.
it's great.
And that was actually not even the first movie adaptation. Joyce has already asked, do we have a favorite movie adaptations? Let's get into that.
All right.
Because there are so many. It's like more than 18 adaptations of it. It's one of the more frequently adapted literary works. I mean, certainly not the most. I mean, I think Christmas Carol's probably got to lead the pack for movie, television adaptations. Even Dracula, you got to argue with that because most Dracula adaptations aren't necessarily the
They're not based.
novel; they're just
No.
other things. And same thing with Frankenstein, even.
Yeah.
But Christmas Carol probably leads the pack for. Somebody can correct me on that if you know if something has been adapted more than a Christmas Carol for movies and
It
TV.
depends on how you define. It depends on how you define it. It's like fictional character. If it's, like
Sherlock could very well be the most adapted character in
right.
all of adaptation history, and probably is.
Do you count radio? Do you count television
Well, if you just go movies and TV,
Yeah.
even Sherlock, I think, leads the pack. If you throw everything else in there, Sherlock definitely leads the pack.
Yeah. So the question is, what's your favorite? Ed, I'm going to put you on the spot. What's your favorite adaptation?
That's a hard one because
Film or television?
There are several good ones, and what I wanted to do is kind of just because there's something I did. Well, it's lost, so we don't know it. But there's one called The Gray Dane, and this is interesting because I'm gonna put the link for the.
I know that one.
I'm gonna put the link in it for the Arthur Conan Doyle encyclopedia here. Here's the description of it. In a mansion full of secret, and it's Danish from Denmark, 1909. In a mansion full of secret rooms and passageways, people are dying shortly after seeing the ghost of a woman in gray, as an old legend dictates. Called in to solve the mystery, Sherlock Holmes has doubts about the supernatural aspect of the crimes and focuses on a more earthly culprit. They took the Hound out and made it a ghostly woman. The Gray Lady. It
almost sounds like, and then there were none as well.
That's really interesting in that they kind of take the basic outline of Hound and then change it some. You can find stills at that link I put up there. The first actual adaptation is a German translation, Der Hund von Baskerville, which was a series of films. The first one was kind of the story.
That's
and
with the latex mask dog.
No, this is like 1914, and then it kind of they do like five or six films released between 1914 and 1920, and then the first one is kind of mostly the Hound story, and then it's like Stapleton escapes and Sherlock has to get him, and then one of the films is like goes back in time and tells like the story of the original Hound of the Baskerville, and there's like a Sherlock character investigating it. And they
Interesting.
actually still exist, and you can track those down.
So those are your favorites, you're saying, Ed?
No, they're not. 'Cause I'm not gonna
It
watch
was just a red herring.
it.
I'll chime in with mine if you want.
Go ahead, because I think there's significant films that I wouldn't mind mentioning.
Mhm.
And but
I
we
will
can, we
say,
can start with your favorite, and then I may mention like five.
I will say that it's a best of the best of a bad lot. Okay. Because the Hound should never be shown. It just takes the magic out of it.
Yeah, they
And
see
so,
it. We saw it. We saw it in the Strand.
and it was terrible. It's way scarier in my mind.
It
It's way
is.
scarier. It looks like a little beagle, running around with a shadow. So yeah, Madeline, exactly. It's the pupper of the Baskervilles.
And we
I want to
mentioned it
pet
in the
it.
last episode, like maybe in the age now when we have legitimate CGI that can really do things and they could seem real, maybe that will change. We haven't seen it yet.
I will say I don't have high hopes for that, Ed. I think that the definitive, and now we've limited ourselves to film and television. I love the
You don't
Basil
have
Rathbone version. I love the Basil Rathbone version. I don't think it's a great movie. I think it
really.
I think the scene setting is beautiful. I think that he plays a Sherlock Holmes that I love. He's the in my mind, he's the picture of Sherlock Holmes that I think of.
Yeah.
I don't love the later Fox pictures, or is it Universal?
Universal.
It up. Yeah, so Fox did the first two that were period pieces.
Yeah, Hound of the
Uh,
Baskervilles, and then they did the Adventure of Sherlock Holmes. They're set in the 19th century, and then Universal acquires the rights to the Doyle estate, and they do 12 films from
mhm.
42 to 46, sometimes three per year.
Many of them, have almost nothing to do with the canon at all,
Now they're very
but
loosely
those,
based on stories, some of them all set in the
yeah.
1940s, and they modernize them.
I would also say the Cushing Hammer horror is a really fun one.
All right, let me
Okay.
just mention a couple other things
Yeah,
about the
you do yours.
because
Okay.
I think it's an excellent film. And I think the changes they make to the script, and I won't tell them for people to spoil it, are really fun. And I don't think they detract from the story. I think they kind of condense it well
Yes.
for this kind of movie.
You have to condense it. It's 2 hours, not 10.
And all of the outdoor scenes on the moors are just movie sets, but they
They
look
don't look like it.
fantastic. They are
It's
so
amazing.
well done. This is when, they really put their, attention into creating, beautiful movies in black and white it can work better than if they were trying to
Yes.
shoot in color.
Especially the
Uh,
fog. The fog is amazing.
there's a great thing is John Carradine is in it. He plays Barrymore,
Really?
who's
Okay.
Barrymore. I love John Carradine, a great, actor and lots of horror films.
I
And
loved
they
him in
have
that Kung Fu movie. Was it or Kung Fu? The Legend
well,
Continues.
that's his son.
Oh yeah,
That's David.
that's
Um,
his grandson, isn't it?
no, that's his son. His three
The
sons.
Legend Continues
His sons
is
are
his
David,
son.
Robert, and Keith, who
Yeah,
all
Keith
went on to
Carradine.
have significant, careers. And our co-host Curtis Armstrong knows Robert well because Robert is the lead nerd in the Revenge of the Nerd movies. The one of there's a cool scene in it in that we get Dr. Mortimer's wife in this, and
Mhm.
she's a spiritualist, medium, and they have a seance. Oh man,
Yes,
contact Sir Charles. I love that. I love that that's
that's
included
great.
in it. That really, and it works.
Very Doylean.
Story too, and very Doylean. And the last line, I'll give it away because everything is over and Sherlock's leaving, and he just says, "Oh, Watson, the needle," and he walks out. Watson
Well,
grabs
they stole that directly from Sign of Four, right?
yeah,
It's like,
Watson grabs his medical bag to take it out because Sherlock needs to be
right.
shoot up because this
He,
case is over.
he's like, I want to be sedated. Um, I will
Talk
say
about talk about battling with the code. They're lucky they got that line in there.
my least favorite adaptation that has come out in my lifetime is the BBC Sherlock. And I know others love it. It's okay. I actually love BBC Sherlock too. How much do I love it? I have more BBC Sherlock swag than I have out of the Baskerville swag. Technically, this is my favorite. It will never go out of style. But I
You don't love
don't
their Hound, the Hounds
know.
of the Baskerville?
It was a really interesting take. But this is the reason that I don't have high hopes for our modern audiences, is they if you're gonna make it, it has to do something new with the material, right? They're not doing faithful adaptations, as far as I can tell, other than perhaps the um like Netflix streamers or Amazon or somebody. They've done a few Dickens adaptations that have been really interesting, but it's those folks that are doing, like, well, I'm gonna make it my own. I don't want your own. I want Doyle's interpretation of the Hound, but I want you to do it in your imagination. I want you to show us what you think of,
Yeah.
in your imagination.
Oh,
Because,
but no, but what you want them to show what they think of it, and that's what they are.
well,
It's
I
what
think that
they think.
somebody like Guillermo del Toro would be my choice, because he takes properties like Pinocchio, for example, and he will take the best of it and include it. He will not excise it and substitute his own core. He takes the essence, and it's just, I think you need an auteur who has a vision for it but loves the material, that
Mhm.
isn't just going, I'm going to adapt this because people know what it is. And yes, I actually really, so Madeline asks the question, then why? Then why? Because at this moment in time and space, it was the best thing I'd ever seen at this moment. So anyway, I loved BBC Sherlock, but it lost me hard. And I think that the adaptation, especially A Study in Pink, was the best modern interpretation of the canon I'd ever seen, because it had such a core referential and reverential interpretation going for it. So
I'm also I wind up partial to everything that Mark Gatiss has his hand in,
I'm
and
gonna watch it. I'm gonna watch it, but I'm not gonna love his Dracula. I'm
and
gonna
I love his Dracula.
I
And
don't.
but part of that is not due to the fact that here I am with him at the Rosenbach showing him the Doyle manuscript for Empty House, and look at how much he's loving it.
That's
Um
amazing.
they
Well, and I'll tell you, I'm gonna watch the heck out of it, because I know that it is something that we're gonna talk about in our circles. And I actually enjoy the elements. I love the actors in that story.
Yeah.
It is definitely like above, in my mind, above Robert Downey Jr., above Johnny Lee Miller. I mean, I'm gonna say it. This is controversial, but you've heard it here first, people. He's better than Matt Frewer.
I hate
My generation's Sherlock Holmes.
I hate those. I think they're so poorly done.
Who I would contrast and compare with him is Dudley Moore.
So you know, I
They're
kind
different.
I kind of get people liking that. Was that 1978 Hound of the Baskervilles, Peter Cook and Dudley Moore? I get people enjoying that in a way, but
Yeah, ironically.
I just find it unfunny.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so I don't know if that's just so I'm afraid that might just be a personal thing for me,
And
that
I'm not, can I walk back one statement I made too, is that I'm gonna watch it and I'm gonna enjoy it in a way, because it is Sherlock Holmes. And I actually had a really good conversation with Brad Kefauver, who is a staunch defender of Holmes and Watson. And I want to watch it with him. And, I did not enjoy it.
no, and
But I
nobody
want to enjoy it through him.
I don't want to go down the road of other Sherlock adaptations.
Sure, sure. I'm just saying, like, I think there's something to love about every adaptation. And it's the actors in Sherlock BBC are some of my favorite actors to play the characters. Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman. And this other characters too, like Mary and Mrs. Hudson.
And they do something
Great.
different with it. Moffat and Gatiss do something different with Sherlock. They highlight some things about Sherlock that isn't only what Sherlock is, but the way they highlight it, I think, works exceptionally well for that series.
Mhm.
And they tie them all together, and I think they're really well done. And their Hound one, I think, is an interesting way of doing the kind of battle between what's real and what's
Right.
supernatural. I think they come up with a good answer to how to modernize that story that works, at least worked for me. And that's a thing that they recognized was a key to that story, is
Mhm.
that balance between real and supernatural, and they really work hard to work it to make it part of the story, and that's up to the audience then to
I I agree with you, and I think that it was a really good interpretation of it. Um, just didn't grab me. I will say it reminds me a little bit of some of the Batman animated series Scarecrow plot lines. But one thing that I like to do is watch uh the what is it? What is its actual title in the BBC Sherlock? It's not Hound of the Baskervilles.
it's Hound, it's the Hounds, it's the Hounds of Baskerville.
Hounds of
Hounds plural
Baskerville.
of
Yes.
Baskerville. Yeah.
Stolen from the Chicago Science Society. Anyway, but watch that and then switch over to the Black Mirror episode called Metalhead. And imagine the beginning of Hound of the Baskerville, and imagine the conclusion as this Black Mirror episode. And I find it a really like it's peanut butter in my chocolate or vice versa. It really works well. And I'm not joking. Like I find that to be a satisfying adaptation.
All righty. What
So
about
you heard
Peter
it here first again. Nobody else could get into this brain.
Peter Cushing has done it twice.
Yes, the TV show as well as the Hammer.
1959, Hammer made a big splash doing, color movies of classic monsters.
Literally a big splash.
They did Frankenstein, they did Dracula, and now they wanted to do it with Sherlock. And Peter Cushing is Sherlock. Christopher Lee is still in it, even though he's not, he's usually the monster. This time he just plays Henry Baskerville. They bring a
Mhm.
tarantula in, which is silly, but
I love it.
they,
Another connection
we were all
between Home
terrified
Alone.
of tarantulas as kids. Like when the 50s on, it was like tarantulas were the worst creature on earth, and we thought they were going to kill us, and they're not that poisonous even.
Well, tarantulas, quicksand, secret masks you rip
Yeah.
off, all very much
I
gothic.
like the changes they make in this, make it more suitable as a horror version of the film, and which work for me. I love a lot of Hammer, movies, but Cushing especially is an excellent, excellent Sherlock. That's the best Sherlock he did. Even though then in the 1960s he takes over for Douglas Wilmer in the BBC Sherlock in color, for TV.
Barely,
Uh,
barely in color.
and but the the scripts aren't that great. The
Flat.
production values aren't great, and usually that's okay with BBC because I watch a lot of BBC historical things, 60s and 70s, and I love them
Oh, we loved Poldark.
because the scripts are great and the actors are great. And but their Hound one, it's just kind of they weren't trying that hard, it seems. That's why Douglas Wilmer left it and didn't want to do anymore. And
Mhm.
then Cushing just didn't have enough good material to really make it work. And there's a two-part Hound of the Baskervilles. And it's just
Yeah,
okay.
it had a bad script. Honestly, like the adaptation wasn't good.
Yeah.
The Hammer horror was funny. It was campy. And you said he made a big splash, or they made a big splash with color. That was literally their thing, is just blood everywhere, right? The red blood. Um, but I think that one's more fun. It has more of a
The way they changed the legend works well for this format to make it a horror movie.
it has
It's
a unique vibe too. And isn't that the one where they bring the gypsies to the fore too? Like that gypsies are a potential
or that,
reason.
yeah, or that's more of the
And I mean Romany people, but
yeah.
yeah.
There's the 83 Hound of the Baskervilles with Ian Richardson,
Mm,
which really does gypsies, and it's just such a miss, which is a shame because Ian Richardson, I think would make a great Sherlock, but and they did the Sign of Four and they did Hound of the Baskervilles with Ian Richardson, and it's just all cliched Sherlock, all the lines and everything. Hello,
this is my daughter Kate.
hi Kate.
Hi.
visiting the show. You know we're live, Kate.
As a matter of fact, do you want to take this book and read it?
Sure.
All right. I'm
Bye-bye, Kate.
Bye, Kate. So Ed has a daughter named Kate as well.
No, I have a wife named Kate.
Oh, a wife named Kate. I'm sorry. So yeah, so my dad's name is Edward, and he goes by Ned.
He's a Ned, though. That's cool.
Yes, Edward.
I wish people had started calling me Ned long ago, but you can't fake it now. I can't tell
No,
people.
that was our introduction. Have you met Ned
Yeah.
during the BSI weekend?
All righty. So Cushing did it twice.
Mhm.
I have to
Watch
mention
the hammer. Watch the hammer.
Hammer is really well done. I have to mention this because it is so bad it's laughable. There's a 1972 Hound of the Baskervilles with Stuart Granger that was made for ABC TV, and you can find it online. It's probably on. Might even be able to find it on YouTube. I'm not sure. Made for TV movie. They were hoping that there were going to be more. It's really poor, but it's interesting because William Shatner is Stapleton, but they give it all away because they do the opening like legend,
no.
and it's Shatner playing Hugo Baskerville, and then it's only for the completists to watch it, or if you just want to watch a silly version that's not very good with Shatner because it's Shatner, but he's not even in it enough. Because it's all Stuart Granger's ego wanting to be Sherlock Holmes, and it's not very good. But
you know what I would love to see an adaptation of Hound of the Baskervilles? A very good friend gave me this.
yeah, it's cool.
And I would have loved to see the, Picard delve back into Hound.
Because they don't do Hound. And
don't do
Roz
Hound.
asked this question about the Star Trek Next Generation Sherlock, but we're not going to talk about it because it's not the Hound. It's just
it's not the Hound. I would have loved for them to lean into that, like that there were a curse or something, and explain that it's cellular peptides or gravitons.
All right, I've got a couple more to hit, and then actually the Russian Hound with Vasily Levinov is actually excellent. The whole series, the Levinov Russian series, is great. Really well worth watching. But there was a 1982 Hound of the Baskervilles for BBC TV in 4 parts. Look at you with your Stapleton, your serial you're starting your serial killer collection there.
That's right.
A lot of people don't like the Hound of the Baskervilles from the BBC in 82 with Tom Baker, because but I think Baker had just finished his run of the Hound of Doctor Who, and then he did this, and he doesn't even like it. He never liked it. He didn't think it was a good one. But I think I just rewatched it again. He's a really good Sherlock, and the whole kind of, I have a nostalgia for 70s 80s BBC historical dramas, even though when you can tell it's on a set, especially in the 70s. I think there's great scripts and they're great actors and they understand how to tell a story, and that's all I need. I don't care if it doesn't look real. I don't care if the Hound doesn't look real. If
you don't want to see the Hound, do the Jaws
in the story, I'm good with it, and I actually think that's actually really worth watching. Now, the two I would, there's, I don't know if I have a favorite.
I can watch your personalities fighting right now.
So weird, because the Jeremy Brett, I would want to be my favorite.
Can I bring, so Jeremy Brett, they didn't have budget, they didn't have time. This was a cost-saving measure. Yeah. Their final problem is fantastic. Their Hound, meh. But here's the thing. I'm gonna Kobayashi Maru this mofo, and I'm gonna tell you that, and this is for you, Rudy. That was another Star Trek deep cut. To me, I still don't think we've had anything that exceeds or even comes close to surpassing the original text. And I think that my recommendation of the best adaptation is Stephen Fry's narration of Hound of the Baskervilles.
Yeah.
I say Stephen Fry specifically because there have been many others.
Yeah.
Stephen Fry is a Sherlockian. He's a member of the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. He has a great anecdote about how he became a member of the SHSL. Um, and he is a true fan of the work. It resonates with him, and you can tell.
Yeah.
He puts his all into the characterizations, the actors, the acting, and he
A great
reads it
read.
as
Yeah.
if we're there.
Yeah.
And so I'm sorry I'm breaking the
No,
rules.
and I've listened to some of those during the run of Sherlock Mondays because they're so good and there's so
Mhm.
much because you get the exact story and it's still an adaptation because it's an actor doing a reading for you
Yes.
that's not
And he's
full
a fantastic
production, but
actor.
it's just
He's
he's such a
he's
good.
also a brilliant host on any show. If you
Yeah,
can get Stephen Fry, do it.
yeah,
I'll put in a plug for you, at the next meeting of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy convention or whatever. Because he's also my definitive reader of Douglas Adams for
yeah,
many of the same reasons. He's also the definitive reader of Max Carados, because he understands the material and is an aficionado. And so it's not a job for him, it's a passion. And I would put him up there with any other adaptation because it is a match made in heaven. The way that he reads and the way that the story is written, and not just for any Sherlock Holmes story, but in particular Hound of the Baskervilles. I recommend his adaptation. In fact, I would say Burt Coull's the BBC audio dramas are my favorite adaptations for just about every other story.
yeah, and they work so exceptionally well. Those BBC radio adaptations. It's really hard to if because it's like I mean they're very traditional and they're giving you the story, but they're not just reading it. They really are dramatizing it. And so they do have to make choices in how they structure the story and change it around
Yes,
a bit for a radio
and it
production.
has to be a certain length.
And they never
They
go
may,
off the rails.
they add some, as a matter of
Yeah.
fact. They remove some and they add some,
Yeah.
but when they do it, it's through the lens of understanding the material.
Mhm.
And so there are some inside jokes that I think you have to be a Sherlockian to understand the changes that were made to the script in order to really love it.
Yeah.
The final thing I'll say is I take it back because I don't love the original Study in Scarlet. I think the best adaptation, in my opinion, is Study in Pink,
From the BBC show,
from
Cumberbatch.
BBC Sherlock, because it is such a wonderful love letter to the original material, but it is not the same.
Oh, there's so much great things in that first episode they did. Um, the um the
Mm,
the Jeremy Brett as part of that Granada series. It's a shame that they had cut the costs and then they just had to do a 90-minute and they should have not done that. And they knew that at the time that they should have held off, or Michael Cox, whoever said we should have held off, but they didn't hold off and they did it anyway. But the interesting thing about it is that the worst part of the cost cutting is just that they don't get to go to Devon. They just do some shots in Yorkshire where the moors are it's kind of pretty. It's
why do you
like
have
it's
why
like
do you have a British production?
there's all
I
this
mean,
like greenery and it doesn't
yeah.
give off that melancholic vibes. That's the biggest part of that I don't like because actually I think the script is tight and really well done, and
Mhm.
Brett is still really great as
Yeah,
Sherlock in it,
he's
and
at his
that
peak.
stuff works.
Yeah,
But it's just that they didn't have a production that kind of worked. But it is for me, who loves tweeds, it's like a fantasy film for tweeds because everybody's in their tweeds and they look so great. And I'm like, oh, I want to be with you guys. And there's so much cigarette smoking. I don't think anybody lights a pipe for that entire thing. Brett,
yeah,
everybody, they're smoking cigarettes through the entire 90 minutes. It's like watching, old Beatles footage from Let It Be where they're all just smoking like
yeah, yeah.
it is.
It's smoking and drinking.
I
Yeah,
love that. I love that they just that's because that's what's in the story. People are smoking cigarettes. That's what we're gonna have here,
right,
you know.
right. Well, it's a faithful adaptation, and I will say, Jeremy Brett is, I think, for me, the person who is most responsible for my loving Sherlock Holmes because it was on while I was a contemporary. I was growing up as the adventures were being produced and
Yeah.
released. And
Yeah.
I have vivid
I was
memories of
watching them new, not from the
that.
very beginning, but after it already
Yeah,
begun, then I was watching them new. Yeah.
that Edward Gorey mystery opening
Yeah.
is, I love it with a
Vincent
passion.
Price
And
was doing it. Yeah. He was hosting
yes,
the show.
yes, and I have VHS tapes that I inherited from one of our Sherlock Holmes Scion Society
I
members
have them.
that
I recorded them. Yeah.
he recorded it off of live TV with all the, PBS Wisconsin logos and the
Great.
intros. I love that. And it was who else? There was another really famous
I
actress,
recorded them off PBS as they were running new, but then I
yeah.
recorded all the old episodes off A&E because they were
Oh,
running all the older episodes. It's just as I
wow.
was starting. So I still have all those with all the commercials from the
Yeah, that's
1980s.
funny.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that for people of a certain generation, I'm not going to say necessarily my generation, but who didn't grow up with Basil Rathbone as their Sherlock Holmes, Jeremy Brett was that generation's
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes, and for good reason. I love him, and I really that this is why we have roses in our coffee pot. But I think for the current modern generation that Benedict Cumberbatch is going to be that. I
Yeah.
know we all love Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayals, but he just didn't do it enough.
No.
There's just two episodes of his, and
And
they're not terribly canonical.
but Downey Jr. doesn't care about Sherlock. I mean, he does. He's not like a Sherlock guy. Like Brett wanted to bring Sherlock to every episode and knew
Mhm.
all kinds of things about him, and they created this
Yes.
Bible for Sherlock for the show that he used and made sure everybody knew this stuff. Cushing did the same thing actually
Mhm.
in for Hammer and for the TV series.
Mhm.
Cushing was really particular about Sherlock and making sure things matched the text, but Brett took it to another level.
Yeah. Well, I loved Cushing, but he didn't inhabit the role. Like he didn't create a new Sherlock Holmes. I think Gillette did. Eileen Watner, or sorry, Eileen Norwood was one. Um, I have a hard time because we don't have a whole lot of evidence of, like a lot of those films are lost.
Yeah.
You get snippets here and there, and with Gillette, there's only the black and white silent
Yeah,
film that was
silent. Yeah.
overdubbed. But every generation has their, Sherlock Holmes, and I gotta say, I don't I could never see Benedict Cumberbatch not playing that role for the current generation.
Well, there's one hound I haven't mentioned yet, and this one doesn't have a great reputation, and I think it's way better than people give it credit for. And that's the 2002 Hound with Richard Roxburgh as Sherlock and Ian
The,
Hart as Watson.
the BBC television.
I think it is a very, very good Hound of the Baskervilles adaptation. And the Watson in it, played by Ian Hart, who people don't remember, he's Professor Quirrell in the first Harry Potter film. Ian Hart is maybe the most capable, most equal partner of any Sherlock adaptation.
Hmm.
He's real. I think Martin Freeman totally takes that over now, um, but up to 2002, that just wasn't really seen as much. Even the David Burke and Edward Hardwicke and the Brett series, while they were their own characters and they were strong, they weren't like equal partners in the investigation. And in this Hound of the Baskervilles, they really make them kind of partners, and like Hart has certain things to do when he's investigating on his own when Sherlock's not there. He's really capable, and you don't think that like, oh, you don't really know what's going on. And it works really well. They kind of try to sensationalize it in the beginning, I think, for modern audiences,
Hmm.
but I still think it works. And they also do the seance thing. They bring that seance thing back from Hound of the Baskervilles. They do it again in this, and it's cool. And for any Shane Black fans out, this is like the Shane Black Sherlock movie because they set it at Christmas.
Okay.
And a lot of the
Okay.
film winds up being about the relationship of Holmes and Watson, but I love that they set it at Christmas too. It's really
That's
worth.
an
I love
interesting
I
twist
love setting any movie at Christmas. I think it adds. There's some extra level there that I really enjoy.
of terror.
You know, so But that 2002 Hound of the Baskervilles, of Richard Roxburgh as Sherlock and Ian Hart as Watson. It's especially worth watching for the Ian Hart as Watson. He's a boy, and he did another. He's Watson in something else. The silk stocking one with Rupert Everett. Is that his name? Yeah, with
Wow,
Rupert Everett.
Madeline
Silk
is
Stocking.
literally typing it exactly
Ian
as you
Hart is
say it,
Watson
Ed.
that, but I haven't seen that in so long. I don't remember if he's good in that or how they treat Watson in that. But I do know that in this Hound version, they treat him really well. She doesn't like
It's
it. I
awful, she
remember liked
says.
it when it was first on, but I can't remember now.
That's
But
wonderful.
that's an odd one that you can find, you can find where however and watch it. And I think,
So
it's no Wishbone slobbery Hound, but
modern, yeah, well, Slobbery Hound, I think that's a really fun one. And that is up there. It's up
what's
there.
great about Wishbone is that they still give you the story. They give you
Yes, they
the
do.
real story. They're not like pulling it like, oh, we can't have a murder, it's for kids. No, like the Sherlock parts of it with Wishbone and his, in his
Absolutely.
Inverness cape and hat, it's still the actual story for the
Mhm.
most part. I mean, they make changes, but
Yeah.
I
It's
really
cut
like
for
that.
length, but it is the
I
story.
really
I
like
will
that.
also one other plug is so 3 podcasts. If you're into Moriarty, Dynamics of a Podcast, Madeline hosts that one. It's amazing. Also really good Star Trek content there. Secondly, if you want to talk about Watson, Watsonian Weekly, Madeline co-hosts that one. It's awesome. But also Sherlock and Company, by the way, or Sherlock and Co. rather, is doing currently producing new episodes of Sherlock Holmes adaptations. It is wonderfully done. It is what I wished that BBC Sherlock could have done. And so BBC Sherlock lost me, like I said, after the Reichenbach fall. But this adaptation modernizes it, but keeps the heart of the story true. It corrects, I think, in many ways, does a quantum leap here, where it corrects some of the things that went wrong with Doyle and adapts them, very the Silver Blaze was amazing. And I got to talk about it on that podcast. But I can't wait till they do Hound. They're doing lesser stories that people have
Yeah.
historically written off, and they're really fun.
When you say Quantum Leap, was that a TV
So
show?
oh yes, so
I
Quantum
don't know.
Leap,
I don't know what like
Scott Bakula,
how you were
captain of
referencing.
the captain of the Enterprise, Scott Bakula, um, would transport between bodies, a la Body Snatchers. No, but he
And
would
back
go to
in time, and he'd inhabit somebody
yeah,
else's
he'd go to a
body.
specific time and place that needed to be fixed. And so I think that this is kind of the same thing. It's they're going through these stories and picking out elements that probably shouldn't have been written the way that they were. The fact that it was all basically old white men and old white women who were the protagonists and everybody else was the villain.
Yeah.
There it captures the true spirit of modern London, which is another melting pot. Um, there there are just so many things to love about it, and they're fabulous storytellers. Jeremy, I believe, is I'm strong. Who is it? No, they're just really, really good scripts, and they're faithful adaptations, but they're not copycats. Those are other people to watch if you haven't caught them. Just start at the start.
All
So
righty. Well, we didn't talk about every adaptation, but we talked about a whole bunch of them.
yeah,
Um, uh, I mean, I could go 3 more hours, but we're gonna
I
end.
think
We're gonna end. We're gonna need to end the show at some
yeah,
point.
I'm gonna need to get another drink here. So
I
no,
had the
it
second one all ready to go, so I have it.
oh, there you go. Well, I just
Almost
poured
done.
myself a Cupita, which is really how you should drink brandy, by the way. Don't drink it out of a balloon snifter. This one concentrates those
Yeah.
vanilla wood notes.
You know what I drink wine out of? A tall
Shot
glass.
glass.
A tall glass. I
Oh,
never
there you
go
go.
in for the shape. I mean, I like certain shaped glasses and I use them for certain things, but I'm never that. Yeah, I like I choose something for the glass, not necessarily for the effect that it will have. There you go.
So my investiture in my Sherlock Holmes Scion is the magic Giselle bullet, because I have a very clear explanation for how Watson's war wounds, plural, happened, and it only took one bullet. So this is a good glass for whiskey if you want to do a shot.
There you go. Well, Max, this was so much fun. I can't wait to figure out other things that I can have you on and do with you with the Rosenback. That would be a blast.
Did you hear that thunderbolt right
No,
outside?
did you really? Yeah.
Oh,
You will
unfortunate.
you will definitely we'll definitely have you on for Sherlock Monthly.
Lovely.
But I hope I can figure out some other things to.
May I make a suggestion live on air with no preamble, no pre-rehearsed pre-discussion? Is I would love to have sort of a meetup with the folks that are especially in this group, the Sherlock Mondays group, where we could get together and have an informal meeting.
Well, if
And
people want to contact me, you all have my email, and I'll be happy to, see if how we can set that up, Max. That's a great idea.
that'd be great. And other things is join those online Sherlock
Yeah.
Scion societies, like the Bark of the Lone Star, etc. They're fabulous.
I'm part of now. Yeah.
Mhm.
Because it's I've met people from this audience coming to the Rosenback. I've met some people at Bloomsday. Here and there, and it's so much fun, and I really enjoy everybody. I'm sorry I missed the Watson. There was a Watson Society meeting on Sunday. I couldn't go. My daughter just got home from California, so I couldn't do anything on Sunday. I hope the meeting went well, Madeline.
The Watsonians are a great group. You
Yeah,
think Sherlockians are smart? Watsonians got them beat.
yeah. Well, Max, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherlockians, for coming to this last episode, this special subscription series, Sherlock Mondays, Hound of the Baskervilles. Thanks to our everybody who's been involved with this. I don't think we had our chat, Mrs. Hudson, tonight. That's why I had to add a couple things in the chat, but by registering for this program, as you all did, you've helped Rosenback create more programs like our free BiblioVentures series, and also help us care for our collections, including the Doyle manuscript for the Empty House, the first editions we have. So if you would like to make a further donation or become a member, you can do so at our website. Go to rosenback.org and you can find out how to do that. That really helps us continue to do this process. And even though you paid for this series, yes, I'm still asking you to make more donations. If you can, that's great. And if you can't, thank you for doing this one. And I'm really happy that this worked for everyone for this show. I hope you all have will return this summer for our special Sherlock Mondays episodes. Violet Hunter Thompson is certainly invited as well. Those summer shows will be completely free for everyone to watch. So everyone that's registered for Sherlock Mondays will get a reminder email and about them. I just don't want it to end, Max.
It never ends.
I'm just
We
trying
never
to,
live, so can never die.
even tonight I'm trying to stretch it out. So, but I don't know. I'm gonna go watch the Stanley Cup Finals. So I'll
All right.
I'll end it tonight. Bye everyone. Bye Max.
Come find us and play.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean
Good night.
it's just so much fun to play in this world. And I will say farewell to all of you, but I will see you next month for a Sherlock Holmes episode, a Sherlock Mondays episode on Loveday Brook. So thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Good night. Is the game?
Oh, I'll hit it in a second here because I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenback Museum and Library, where the game is a book.